simply because a lot of people ask generally, myself also, in regard to what the conditions are for uh, truly claiming any type of or form of love for the Prophet ﷺ. It's very difficult to kind of determine exactly uh, what the particular conditions are, but Allah has generally laid the conditions out in the Quran. And the problem that we face often is, like Imam al-Busayri states, he says, "Astaghfirullah min qawlin bila amalin, laqad nasabtu bihi naslan ladhi uqumi." That I repent for saying something and not practicing, i.e., or saying a thing and not acting by it. It's as if an impotent man were to claim that he has children. So we have to be very, very careful as to what we say in regard to our connection to the Prophet. The great scholar Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam, Egyptian scholar, of the same century as Busiri. In fact, some reports suggest that they were friends. Allah knows best. Stated that using the word ishq, for instance, Ain Shin Qaf, ishq, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in one report, according to some of the ulama, even for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so you say, I'm ashikun nabi, or ashikullah, he said it's makruh, it's impermissible on certain grounds. Because he said that the word ishq has some type of sensual love or inference to it. Other scholars allowed it. But they were very, very careful of what words they even used. That's my point. Mahabba is normally used for the Prophet ﷺ. Hub is used. Although in Urdu and Farsi, the word ishq has a different meaning. So, or very, ever so slightly anyway. So it can be used in that context. And it's very difficult to kind of claim something and then not be able to live up to it. It's very, very difficult, especially if we consider the fact that we're all defective creatures and we're constantly striving to get some type of perfection or close to some type of perfection. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lays out a few conditions in the Quran. He states, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِ يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Say, i.e., to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you love God, then follow me, and God will love you and forgive your sins. Now, ittiba, following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has a lot of conditions. One of the cornerstones, or the main condition rather, is sincerity, ikhlas, free from ostentation, showing off, or these types of vices. And the reason I mention that is we live in an age of external beauty, and everything is external. Our clothes, our phone, the way we look, selfies, taking pictures of ourselves, constantly looking in the mirror. The sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, for instance, was that a person only comb his hair once every few days, for instance. The hadith Shima'il Tirmidhi. What that means is that it doesn't mean you look scruffy, because his head was mainly covered, but he gave more importance on wanting people to be more concerned with the internal than external. The word for external beauty in Arabic is jamal. The word for internal beauty is ihsan, husn, is internal. And he was very concerned with people's internal beauty. And that's kind of lacking in this day and age, because we have a particular social engineering now that promotes everything external. Internal is it doesn't matter much. Even with food, they don't really care. once it gets past the throat, what it does to your body, as long as it tastes good. And the sunnah is there essentially to revive people's internal rather than the external. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Allahu la yanzuru ila ajsadikum wa suwarikum." The variations of this hadith. God doesn't look at your bodies nor your the way that you look, ila suwarikum, or your form. وَلَكِنْ يَنْظُرُ إِلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. He looks at your heart and the actions that you do. They're very important things, because judgment is only left to God, or is left to God, and external often doesn't infer the internal. Something very, very important. So this verse itself, the cornerstone of this verse, that follow me, is that you have sincerity in following the Prophet ﷺ. But what's very, very important here is that we also kind of live in a pseudo love culture as well, where love essentially has no evidence. You know, if you love somebody, then there must be some kind of external evidence. And the Sahaba were kind of very concerned about that. Very concerned about showing this external evidence for the Prophet. Talha, for instance, on Yawm al-Uhud, the Battle of Uhud, took more arrows in his body than any other Sahabi. It's very important, because what he did was, the Mount of Uhud, he carried the Prophet up the mountain. And on that day, the Prophet was wearing 2 sets of chainmail. Eventually, he was injured so badly that they just couldn't find him. He was defending the Prophet so much and the other Sahaba that he just disappeared at one point. And they found him in a ditch. He did survive, but not for long. His injuries were really damaging. And the day the Prophet renamed that day, instead of Yawm al-Uhud, he named it Yawm Talha. But these are external signs of internal beauty, where these people are really showing or manifesting their love for the Prophet ﷺ. In one narration, which is very, very important, one of the great Hufaz of the Quran, Ka'ab, he's a great Hafiz of the Quran, great Hafiz of the Quran. And Ubay, he's reading behind the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ, Allah causes him to forget a particular word in the Quran. Now, the reason I mentioned that in that order was Allah causes to forget, because Allah can cause the Anbiya to forget. The Anbiya don't, based on their own volition or intention, forget something that Allah causes, so that a lesson can be learned from that. It's not a misgiving, essentially, because prophets, they're intrinsically perfect. They can't commit sins, or even misgivings are impossible for them. He finished the Salah, alayhi salatu wasalam, and he turned and he said, in fact, it was Ka'ab, sorry. He said, "It's Ka'ab here," or any of the other Hufaz. And said, "Labbaik ya Rasulullah, I'm here." He said, "Did you not hear me hear that I missed a word, that I forgot a word in the Quran?" He said, "I swear by Allah that I thought God had cancelled the verse, or cancelled that word from the Quran." He didn't ever intend or feel that the Messenger of Allah could have made an error in that regard, which is very, very important about the adab towards and love towards the Prophet ﷺ. Incredible. There were people allotted amongst the Sahaba to carry the sandals of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Hurairah, for instance, was one of them. So was Abdullah ibn Abbas, which was a great honor for them. And these types of things were external manifestations of internal love for the Prophet ﷺ. But don't think, though, and I'll finish on this point before we start this singing, don't think that the Prophet ﷺ, that all the people around him, to begin with, didn't require training. People came to him in the worst states, and he corrected and fixed and reformed all of them, in fact. And not only that, he allowed them to behave around him in a comfortable manner. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, I think I quoted this last time, and he was shaking, and the Prophet ﷺ calmed him down, obviously from the awe of the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. And he said to him that I am the son of a mother who ate dried meat and drank milk, meaning don't be afraid, and he calmed him down. Many other people, for instance, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said he had a particular problem, a sin that he committed, and he said, "Ya Rasulullah, I commit this sin, but I feel extremely bad about it. I have a lot of remorse." And the Prophet ﷺ praised him, actually. In feeling remorse for a sin is a maqam, is essentially a turning to Allah. It's a type of maghfirah, it's a type of forgiveness almost. he didn't say to him, why are you doing this or why are you doing that. Even the man who came to him that had a problem with flirting, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ gave him several examples or scenarios, after which he said, I won't do it again. But he didn't rebuke him, essentially. He wasn't harsh with him. So these are very, very important things in following the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, and trying to imitate as best as possible his manner around people. One of the important things, one of the important things about human beings is that outside of the body, we have a great connection. We're going to talk about one particular riwayah today, that the arwah, the junud, our soldiers. And we're going to talk about that today, inshallah, which is really important. But Adam alayhi salam spent a very long time, in fact, before Sayyidina Hawa was created, according to some narrations, in Jannah, in Al-Jannah, spent some time. But even though Allah had given him in Al-Jannah, the trees and the fruits and the land of Al-Jannah was impeccable, he still felt incredibly lonely, actually. And he asked Allah to create for him a partner. What's important about that is human beings will never be satisfied with material goods. They'll only be satisfied with other people. Other people make them happy. And one of the reasons I believe that is because all of our souls are created from the loins of Adam, or from Adam, Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. And for that reason, we have a connection, because we were at a point one that was divided. So human beings, for that reason, have a deep, deep-rooted connection with each other. And maybe it's the fear of non-existence that scares people from death. People are always scared of death. They're really scared of dying. I don't think people are scared of dying. I think people are scared of not existing, because the soul has never felt that before. Once it was created, it never felt non-existence. And the only thing that brings comfort to people when they think about death is other people, the fact that they meet people, or they be in the company of other people. The loneliest feeling is a feeling in the grave. Why? Because you're alone. You're without people. Even if you were given material goods there, you still probably feel lonely. And that's the point of uns, that human beings are made in a state of companionship, and the best sohbah is with the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. Inshallah, we're going to read the khatam. It's going to take about 20 minutes. We're not going to make a stop, though. I don't know if you've read khatams of the Burda. They're read in different ways. There are more than 15 ways. I know myself that it's read for different things, for shifa, for najah, for different things. We're going to read it through, inshallah, from beginning to the end. We'll see how. Well, we may, if they've only got voice for chapter 1, we'll only do chapter 1. We'll see how it goes, inshallah. How long have you got? Oh, we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Let's just continue. We'll see how it goes. Now, who has a copy of the Burda here? You should all have your personal copies with you. If you don't have a copy, if you can just follow on, I'll just move it as I go along. Otherwise, next session we'll have copies for everybody, just for the khatam or for the reading. Other than that, please try to bring a copy with you, because it kind of makes it difficult to follow. Even though we're only commenting on a couple of lines, it's difficult to follow. You should maybe write notes around it for the. Let me put this on.
Let's see. Just open chapter 4. Yeah, that's fine. Makes sense.
مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. آمن تذكر جيران بذي سلام مزجت دمعا جرى من مقلة بدمي أم هبت الريح من تلقاء كاظمة وأومض البرق في الظلماء بالإضام. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فما لعينيك إن قلت كفوفها مات وما لقلبك إن قلت استفيق يا إني. أيحسب الصب أن الحب ملكتم ما بين منسجم منه ومضطرب. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. لولا الهوى لم ترق دمعا على ضلال ولا أرقت لذكر البني والعالم. فكيف تنكر حبا بعدما شهدت به عليك عذول الدمع والسقم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وأثبت الوجد خطي عبرات وضانا مثل البهار على خديك والعنم. نعم سرى طيف من أهوى فأرقني والحب يعترض اللذات بالألم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. يا لئيمي في الهوى العذري معذرة مني إليك ولو أنصفت لم تلومي. عادتك حالي لا سري بمستتر عن الوشاة ولا دائي بمنحسم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. ما حتاني النصح لكن لست أسمعه إن المحب عن العذال في صممي. إني اتهمت نصيح الشيب في عذال والشيب أبعد في نصح علمتها. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فإن أمارتي بالسوء ما تعظت من جهلها بنذير الشيب والهرم. ولا أعدت من الفعل الجميل دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. لو كنت أعلم أني ما أوقره كتمت سيرا بدا لي منه بالكتم. من لي برادي جماح من غواياتها كما يراد جماح الخيل بالنجوم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فلا ترم بالمعاصي كسر شهواتها إن الطعام يقوي شهوة النهم. والنفس كالطفل إن تحمله شاب على حب الرضاع وإن تفطمه ينفطم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فاصرف هوى حاذر أن توليه إن الهوى ما تولى يسمي أو يصيب. وراعيها وهي في الأعمال سائمة وإن هي استهلت المرعى فلا تسم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. كم حسنت لذة للمرء قاتلة من حيث لم يدري أن السم في الدسم. واخشى الدسائس من جوع ومن شبع فرب مخمصة شر من الدخام. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. واستفرغ الدمع من عين قد امتلأت من المحارم والزم حمية الندم. وخالف النفس والشيطان واصحهما وإنهما محضاك النصح فاتهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. ولا تطع منهما خصما ولا حكما فأنت تعرف كيد الخصم والحكم. أستغفر الله من قول بلا عمل لقد نسبت به نسلا لذي عقم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. أمرتك الخير لكن ما ثمرت به وما استقمت فما قولي لك استقم. ولا تزودت قبل الموت نافلة ولم أصلي سوى فرض ولم أصم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. ظلمت سنة من أحيا الظلام إلى أن اشتكت قدماه الضر من ورمي. وشد من سغب أحشاءه وطوى تحت الحجارة كاشحا مطرف الأدم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وراودته الجبال الشم من ذهب عن نفسه فأراها أيما شمم. وأكدت زهده فيها ضرورته إن الضرورة لا تعدو على العصم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وكيف تدعو إلى دنيا ضرورة من لولاه لم تخرج دنيا من العدم. محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. نبينا الأمير النهي فلا أحد أبر في قول الله ولا نعم. هو الحبيب الذي ترجى شفاعته لكل هول من الأهوال مقتهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. دعا إلى الله فالمستمسكون به مستمسكون بحبل غير منفصم. فقى النبيين في خلق وفي خلق ولم يدانه في علم ولا كرم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. وكلهم من رسول الله ملتمس غرفا من البحر أو رشفا من الديم. وواقفون لديه عند حدهم من نقطة العلم أو من شكلة الحكم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فهو الذي تم معناه وصورته ثم اصطفاه حبيبا بارئ الناس منزه عن شريك في محاسنه. فجوهر الحسن فيه غير منقسم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. دامت دعاته النصارى في نبيهم بما شئت مدحا فيه واحتكمي. وانسب إلى ذاته ما شئت من شرف وانسب إلى قدره ما شئت من عظام. وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فإن فضل رسول الله ليس له حد فيعرب عنه ناطق بفمي لو نسبت قدره آياته عظاما أحيا اسمه حين يدعى دارس الرمام. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. لم يمتحن النبي ما تعيا العقول به حرصا علينا فلم نرتب ولم نهم. عيا الورى فهم معناه فليس يرى في القرب والبعد فيه غير منفحم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. كالشمس تظهر للعينين من بعد صغيرة وتكل الطرف من أمام. وكيف يدرك في الدنيا حقيقتها قوم نيام تسلوا عنه بالحلم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فما بلغ العلم فيه أنه بشر وأنه خير خلق الله كلهم. فما بلغ العلم فيه أنه بشر وأنه خير خلق الله كلهم. وكل آي أتى الرسل الكرام بها فإنما اتصلت من نوره بهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. فإنه شمس فضل هم كواكبها يظهرن أنوارها للناس في ظلام. أكرم بخلق نبي زنه خلق بالحسن مشتمل بالبشر متسم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. كالزهر في ترف والبدر في شرف والبحر في كرم والدهر في إمام. كأنه وهو فرد من جلالته في عسكر حين تلقاه وفي حشم. كأنما اللؤلؤ المكنون في صدف من معدن منطق منه ومبتسم. لا طيب يعدل تربا ضم عظمه طوبى لمنتشق منه وملتثم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم. يا ربي صل على محمد وعلى سادتنا آله وصحبه الكرام. يا إمام الرسل يا سندي أنت باب الله معتمدي فبدنيا وآخرتي يا رسول الله خذ بيدي أو إمام الظلم I can to reach Jannah, so in this life and the hereafter, guide me through the way and hold my hand قسما بالنجم حين هوى ما المعافى والسقي مساوى فاخلع الكونين عنك سوى حب مولى العرب والعجم أو إمام messengers of Allah. On you I come to reach Jannah, so in this life and the hereafter, guide me through the way and hold my hand. سيد السادات من مضري غوث أهل البدو وحضري صاحب الآيات والسور منبع الأحكام والحكم أو إمام messengers of Allah. On you I come to reach Jannah, so in this life and the hereafter, guide me through the way and hold my hand. ما رأت عين سترى مثل طه في الورى بشرا ما رأت عين وليس ترى مثل طه في الورى بشرا ما رأت عين وليس ترى مثل طه في الورى بشرا ما رأت عين وليس ترى مثل طه في الورى بشرا خير من فوق طاهر الأخلاق والشيم يا إمام الرسل يا سندي أنت باب الله معتمدي فبدنياي وآخرتي يا رسول الله خذ بيدي. نور الهدى وفنا بحسنه حيانا نور الهدى وفنا بحسنه حيانا وباللقاء أحيانا صلى عليه مولانا وباللقاء أحيانا صلى عليه مولانا أهلا به وسهلا قد طاب فيه المجلى أهلا به وسهلا بحسنه حيانا الهدى وفانا بحسنه حيانا وباللقاء أحيانا صلى عليه مولانا وباللقاء أحيانا صلى عليه مولانا طالما أشكو غرامي يا نور الوجود طالما أشكو غرامي يا نور الوجود وأنادياتها يا معدن الجود وأنادياتها يا معدن الجود يا رسول الله نظرا يا حبيب الله 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 بنيتي أقصى مرامي أحباب الشهود بنيتي أقصى مرامي أحباب الشهود وأرى باب سلامي يا ذاك الجدود وأرى باب سلامي يا ذاك الجدود طالما أشكو غرامي يا نور الوجود طالما أشكو غرامي يا نور الوجود وأنادياتها يا معدن الجود وأنادياتها يا معدن الجود اغرف من بحر عرب الترقاوي اغرف من بحر عرب الترقاوي ماوى المضطر من المهاوي ماوى المضطر من المهاوي الله 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 ربي الله 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 ربي عوني وحسبي ما لي سواه عوني وحسبي ما لي سواه قطب الولاية شمس الهداية قطب الولاية شمس الهداية عين العناية للسر حاوي عين العناية للسر حاوي الله 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 ربي الله 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 ربي عوني وحسبي ما لي سواه عوني وحسبي ما لي سواه إن جبرتم كسر قلبي أنتم أهل الزمام إن جبرتم كسر قلبي أنتم أهل الزمام أو هاجرتم يا حبايب هكذا شأن الكرام أو هاجرتم يا حبايب هكذا شأن الكرام إن جبرتم كسر قلبي أنتم أهل الذمام إن جبرتم كسر قلبي أنتم أهل الذمام أو هاجرتم يا حبايب هكذا شأن الكرام أو هاجرتم يا حبايب هكذا شأن الكرام طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داعي ما دعا لله داعي طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع وجب الشكر علينا ما دعا لله داعي ما دعا لله داعي الله 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 محمد رسول الله.
May Allah reward the munshids greatly for their singing and give them suhbah with the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. Inshallah, we're going to continue from where we left off last week. However, last week, as I mentioned, was an introduction. Today, I'm going to analyze the first line with a few more points, important points. Just as an overview in terms of sources of commentary, I mentioned some of them last week. The English language suffers greatly in anything on the Burda. I have, however, seen on the internet that Ibn Ajiba's commentary is being translated. I don't know if it's out or if it's partially been translated, and I've heard that Ibn Ashur's commentary is being translated as well currently. Ibn Ajiba's commentary, rahimahullah ta'ala, is a good commentary. However, it contains a lot of grammatical points, so I'd be interested to see what they translate and what they leave. Tahir ibn Ashur's commentary is much better for the English market, simply because he doesn't really delve that much into grammar, and he kind of gives the meanings of the lines. So I look forward to seeing that. But to date, there's nothing really in terms of commentary expansive. There are some footnotes on several editions of the Burda, or certain studies have been published of particular chapters, or which are not bad. But as a whole, the language suffers, or you suffer rather, in that there's no commentary that's available. But for the Arabic-speaking market, or those who have access to Arabic, can access Arabic texts, there's an array of texts that are available. The best one, in my opinion, is the commentary of al-Kharputi, which stands shoulders. I mean, it's the best commentary, in my opinion, overall, written on the Burda. It's very old, and only old editions are available. I think the new edition has been printed in Pakistan, actually. The most expansive commentary is by Ibn Maqlash. However, you're going to get 40 pages on one line sometimes, if you've got the energy to read that. My main source is Kharputi, although I quote Maqlash and a few others as well. The first line of the Qasida, as we discussed last week, أَمِنْ تَذَكُّرِ جِيرَانٍ بِذِي سَلَمِ مَزَجْتَ جَمْعًا جَرَامٍ مُقْلَةٍ بِدَمِ. Okay. Last week we discussed, please forgive us for this, it just doesn't come up very well on my iPad. We discussed the relationship between, or how the poetry of Layla al-Majnun by some of the Sufi poets relates to the poetry, especially the Tarannum, the style of poetry of Nasib mentioned in the Burda, specifically Umar ibn Farid, whose poem on Layla al-Majnun, Imam Busayri almost entirely replicated. I even quoted the first two lines for you. They sound almost identical to the Burda of Busayri. And the relationship between the two is simply not of sensual love, essentially, but of what we call platonic love. Love that kind of traverses the physical, and the more platonic, more pure love. Now, today, inshallah, we're going to comment on this line in more depth, slightly more depth anyway. Now, that doesn't come up very, very well, but khair. Now, we begin with the first word, important word that's mentioned in the line, which is tadakkur. I mean, tadakkur. This word is derived from the word dhikr or dhukr, which have two different meanings. Dhikr you're all familiar with, which essentially is dhikrul lisan. Dhikr in the Arabic language means to remember something. How that's with the kasra and the dal. But the word dhukr with the dhamma and the dal refers to a type of recollection, remembering that solely takes place in the heart without mentioning it on the tongue. And in this particular tadhakkur, as a translation reads, is it because of the remembrance, has both of them, i.e. one in him mentioning constantly the Prophet ﷺ, and the second in a constant state of wanting to be closer to the Prophet ﷺ, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the next point that al-Busayri mentions is jiran. We discussed this last week a little, and I'll just introduce you to the line itself. We discussed how this type of nasib, this type of Arabic poetry sets a journey almost in the first chapter, reaching the beloved, and has very inferred comments or very ambiguous comments, to say the least, in the first chapters especially, without giving away too much in terms of who the beloved is. He's quite clear here if people read between the lines. And we also said how he's speaking to himself when he says, "Amin tadhakkuri jiranin bidhi salami." Is it the memory of the neighbors of Dhu Salam? Busayri has essentially created an alter ego that he's speaking to. One is a denier of love, and one is a lover himself. Constantly the battle between the two, and both give their proofs for their position. Now, this is a famous style that the Arabs adopted, especially in talking about love. Most of pre-Islamic poetry is full of love stories between Imra'ul Qais and his cousin. The Arabs married their cousins as well. If it's not that, it's about their horses, or about how many people they have killed in battle, or how sharp their swords are, or something like that. I mean, it's very odd that they don't talk about how big their houses were, because the nomads, anyway, the nomadic Arabs all lived in tents. So they don't mention much of that. He mentions the word jiran. Right? This is incredibly important, because last week I mentioned something, but I want to add to that this week. That is it the memory of the neighbors of Dhu Salam? That's the first part. Now, who are the neighbors? There are several positions given about the neighbors, and I want to go into. Firstly, Kharputi very famously, and he's probably the only person that extensively comments on this word, extensively. For instance, Ibn Maqlash, the great commentator, who has the longest commentary on the Burda, has one line commentary on this word, whereas Kharputi has almost a page and a half just on this one word. And his opinion, and I actually tend to agree with him, is that the reason or the meaning of this word jiran, although it's neighbors in the plural, refers only to one person. That it refers to the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the evidence that he gives or kind of presents. He states that the reason jiran is mentioned as a metaphor, almost neighbors, is because one of the things that's kind of connects you to your neighbors is kathratul khalt, he says, which is you constantly mixing with your neighbors. So you're always seeing them. You see them come out of their houses, you may talk to them, converse with them, socialize with them, maybe your families go over to each other's houses. So there's a constant mixing with the neighbors. And he said that mixing, that khalt, is essentially the central aspect of your relationship. Otherwise, you wouldn't know them. And he says because he's been constantly thinking about the message of Allah, and those thoughts have remained in his mind, the neighbors are actually al-mahbub, the messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. This is very, very important. And then there's a question, why did he mention neighbors? Why not neighbor then? It's very odd that you mention the plural instead of the singular word. And Kharputi says because it's for ta'azim, it's to magnify the meaning. In Arabic, when you want to magnify a meaning, you use the plural often. Allah uses it in the Quran when he calls himself nahnu, or refers to himself as we in the royal. Similarly, in Urdu and other languages, you employ the plural sometimes. But I will tell you just a general error here. Don't get angry with this. But a lot of people are transferring rules of Arabic rhetoric and all the rhetoric into English. In English, when we refer to a person in the singular that he said, it's not disrespectful. It's fine to say he said. You don't need to translate Arabic rhetoric into English. It doesn't actually make any sense. So if you say they said, for instance, and it's an individual, that is actually grammatically incorrect. There are some weak opinions in English grammar that allow it. The Prophet ﷺ was the most eloquent of God's creation, and he spoke the Arabic language to the highest level of eloquence, and he exhorted people to speak language to the highest level of eloquence. So in the English language, the highest level of eloquence is not to use rules from or of rhetoric of other languages. You stay within the language as long as it doesn't infer any type of disrespect. It's fine to use it. So often people think if I don't use they, it's going to seem very disrespectful. Maybe in Arabic or Urdu or Farsi, but not in English. So there's nothing wrong with it in using it in English as long as the language has that capacity and it allows it. So this is called al-jam'u li-ta'zim. The plural is employed to magnify the meaning. So Jiran refers exclusively, according to Al-Kharputi, to the Prophet ﷺ. Then we moved on to the word Dhu Salam, because does it really make sense then? Is it the memory of the beloved, if we translate neighbors now as beloved, the beloved in Dhu Salam? It makes perfect sense. But Dhu Salam is a controversial word in terms of its agreed meaning. The word Dhu Salam has two words in it. It has the word Dhu and Salam. Dhu and Salam. The word Dhu in Arabic refers to somebody who possesses something. And the word Salam is something else, which is disputed. In Arabic, for instance, the Quran, Allah calls himself Dhul Jalali, the possessor of glory and might, Dhul Jalali, wal Ikram, and the one who gives nobility. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anh was Dhul Nurayn. He was a possessor of the two lights. He married two of the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ. But the question is, there is another word in Arabic which is very similar, which is sahib. Sahib. What is the difference between a sahib, one who owns also, and the word dhu, also one who owns? The difference is the following. With the word dhu, the possessor is always greater than the possessed entity. Always greater. So when you say dhul jalal, dhul, the possessor of might, the possessor of glory, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the possessor who is greater than that which he possesses, essentially, as in terms of his essence. But when you say sahib in Arabic, sahib, the thing that he possesses often is more valuable than him. For instance, if you say sahibul bayt, landlord, you're only mentioning him because of the house. It's not because he's important. The focus is on the house. So the word dhu here refers to somebody who possesses salam. Now, however, some of the scholars and the majority actually say Dhu Salam is just the name of a place. It's a place between Mecca and Medina. Now, this is in fact the majority opinion, even though I don't adhere to it. Rebellious, I am. I don't adhere to the position, but it is the majority position. And not only is it a place, but it's a place that contains a tree, a valley, wadin, fihi shajaratun, a valley that has a tree. And that tree is the kind of the epicenter of the meaning. Oh, and it governs the love. Why? Because it's a tree that the Messenger of God ﷺ would lean on and take shade under when traveling between Mecca and Medina, or Medina and Mecca. And by his body rubbing on that tree then absorbs the perfumed intrinsic beauty of the Prophet ﷺ, or scent rather, and then that scent is spread to other places, which we'll see in the next line. And according to the majority, it's that place that al-Busayri is thinking of. Now, if that's the case as the Prophet ﷺ, what does it translate as? It translates as, is it the memory of the beloved in Dhu Salam? So that makes perfect sense. It's not the people that are near Dhu Salam, the Sahaba for instance, or the people who visit there. It's the Messenger of Allah ﷺ himself, which gives a perfect meaning to the line. That it's actually, the entire line is to do with the Prophet ﷺ, that the neighbors actually are not what some other commentators thought. However, there is a difference of opinion. Okay, there is a difference of opinion on that. Now, another opinion is that Dhu Salam refers to Darus Salam. Darus Salam is Al Jannah, as you know, a particular place in Al Jannah, actually. And the metaphor here is that Darus Salam is the Rawda. It represents the Rawda al-Musharrafa. The Rawda is the earth that the Prophet ﷺ was buried in, and that surrounds his noble sanctuary, and where people fight over to pray Nafil in that place. Now that place, according to Qadi Iyad al-Maliki, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Maliki jurist and theologian, he states that that place itself is greater, and he claims consensus actually, is the greatest place that God has created place, is greater than Al-Jannah. It goes as far as saying that it's greater than the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason for that is people say, oh, some people anyway, will say, oh, the throne of Allah. As soon as Allah you mention, they think that you're talking about God's essence. Isn't that shirk maybe? Well, no, not really, because the throne is created by God. God doesn't sit on a throne. I mean, unless you make God a Zeusian God, then you have big problems anyway. The arsh of Allah Jalla wa Ala is not for him to sit on. God is not a human being. He's not created. He's not jawhar. He's not a substance. He doesn't sit. It doesn't. God is laysa kamithlihi shay. They say, Imam Laqani said, ma khatara bibalik fallahu laysa kadhalik. Whatever you can conjure in your mind, know that God is nothing like that. What was the throne created for? The purpose of the throne is to show God's might on the Day of Judgment. It's carried by the angels. In fact, in a hadith raised by Imam Tabarani, يُجْلِسُ اللَّهُ نَبِيَّهُ عَلَىٰ عَرْشِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, that God will seat the messenger of God, his messenger, on his throne on the Day of Judgment. In one narration that al-Tabarani and various other ulama mention that particular narration. Now, so it's no problem being greater than the arsh. It's just another creation of Allah. And the reason for it is not because the earth itself, but because the earth is connected to the body of the Prophet ﷺ. And whatever is connected to the body of the Prophet ﷺ is pure, and it has it's the best of God's creation. Now, this is also mentioned in the story of Uzair in Al-Quran Al-Karim, when he asks God about resurrection and how will people be resurrected, and then God causes him his soul to leave his body for 100 years, and he wakes up and he looks at his ride, and it's withered away and only bones are left, but his food is still preserved. His food is still there after 100 years, still preserved as it was. And the meaning of one of the meanings of esoteric at Tafsir al-Ishari to that is the fact that the food was touching his body. It was in a bag that was touching his body, and that because of his body being a prophet of God, God preserved that food because of that great spiritual energy that surrounds the prophets, which is amazing, because you see this kind of motif almost in a lot of the tafasir when they're mentioning this kind of miraculous nature of the bodies of the prophets. The Prophet ﷺ himself said, Inna Allah harrama ala al-ardi an ta'kula ajsad al-anbiya. God has made it impermissible for the earth to consume bodies of the prophets. There's an addition to the hadith, and many people leave, which another Busayri, who is a muhaddith, there are two Busayris famous, one the poet, one the muhaddith, and it's a sound addition to the hadith, which is for Nabiyullahi hayyu yurzaqu. The Prophet of God is alive and Allah sustains him. According to Ibn Hajj al-Haythami, Shafi'i, the great Makki Shafi'i Imam, he states that when it rains, the body of the Prophet absorbs that rain as sustenance, or for sustenance. And there are different opinions how this happens. But the Messenger of God is alive in his grave. I mean, this is absolute ijma' on that. Or you always have defectors and some odd people, but simply because of this hadith. Now, somebody said, I remember that, why doesn't he just get up from his grave? This is stupidity. The life of the Prophet is ithmas that he lives now. It's greater than the earthly life. He has greater powers and greater qurb to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody's saying the Messenger of Allah is living as he was living on the earth. The earth is a very a very confined life. The life that he's living in his state is in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the tawajjuh, in that his rank is increasing day by day. So it's Darus Salam. Now, another opinion is that it refers to salama. And this is probably the most interesting opinion, actually. And I mentioned this last week in depth anyway. Salama in Arabic, they say Dhu Salam, meaning salama, that it's actually a place that protects you from atham, sin, and alam, illnesses. So this place that Imam Busayri is mentioning is Dhu Salam, is a place that protects you from sin. Salama min al-atham. What's very, very interesting is that if this is the case, then what does this place refer to? Kharpouti states that with this opinion, what it infers essentially is that place of peace can only be one place. It's the A'la Illiyin. A'la Illiyin is a word mentioned in the Quran in several places to mean different things. For instance, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Kitabun Marqum, the Lawh al-Mahfuz, that it's in A'la Illiyin, it's a place. Many of the ulama say A'la Illiyin is Jannah itself. There's a difference of opinion. However, what Kharpouti states and many state is that when human beings were created in the state of souls, that's how they were created. They were created first, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Qalu bala shahidna. Indeed you are, we have witnessed it, meaning literally witnessed it. That place, it was, according to this position, A'la Illiyin. A'la Illiyin is this place where all the souls were gathered. Now, he states that A'la Illiyin specifically contained the souls of prophets, sages, and the great people. Okay, and that is the place that Imam al-Busayri is actually referring to. So why is that even important? Simply because we all, every individual, every mu'min has that, well, every person actually has that secret memory locked away, encrypted in his mind. Everybody in their mind, somewhere within the soul, has that memory of Alastu bi Rabbikum. It makes perfect sense because the soul, the beauty of the soul, and the felicitous nature of the soul is such that whatever happened then, those memories are still contained within the soul. That the great sages, the great awliya, Gnostics, and the prophets, of course, remember that particular day. They remember that covenant, the mu'ahada, mu'ahidun, Allah calls them in the Quran. They remember that pact, or rather that agreement that they made. Now, there is a particular hadith for it, as Kharpouti quotes, that the souls themselves al-arwahu junudun mujannadatun, that the souls are conscripted soldiers. This is hadith in Bukhari and a hadith Muslim. It's not a people think just fanciful Sufi tales. Hadith in Bukhari, that souls are conscripted soldiers. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that those whom they recognize, they get along with, and those whom they do not recognize, they will not get along with. This is now, when you meet somebody, for instance, and you feel a kind of connection to that person, you're like, oh, can feel some love here. I'm not talking about in college, if you see a girl or in city center, if you're standing there and you say, oh, mashallah, inshallah. No, it's that can be anything, that can be shaitan. But often you'll probably have a story to tell about where you've come across a particular person. You just can feel some type of spiritual connection and energy that's drawing you to that person, and when you converse with them, even more so it increases. Ibn Hajar Asqalani comments on this hadith and states that there are several possibilities here. One is that actually this hadith refers to that place, that time, that they were there, we were there, the souls were there for a very long time. And this is very important. People think that the kind of souls were created by God, and then like the day after, a few hours after, there was, but that doesn't make any sense, because even now, right now, if you don't have any children, for instance, and you're unmarried, the children that you'll bring into this world, the souls of those children are already created. And where do they reside? You see, where do they reside? They reside in a particular place. And Ibn Hajar states that the souls would meet there, and they would talk about their pessimism about the future. Imagine that. They would sit about their pessimism about the future, like what's going to happen to us, where we're going to go, what's going on, are we going to go? Because God hadn't informed them of his plan. And they were there for many, many hundreds of years, the souls. And in that place, they made acquaintances, they met people they liked, people they didn't like, the souls, people they were inclined toward. And this hadith, Junudun Mujannada, refers to that people literally made pacts together. So whoever they liked, they were in the company of those people. And some of the inferences, some of the commentaries to hadith refer to people, for instance, of great Sufi sages, great master of esotericism and the spiritual sciences, that their students, for instance, and their spiritual inheritors were all around them at that time. That pact of spirituality, of sunnah, was not made here, but was already made and nurtured in a different world before people came here. And here you're just replaying almost a connection that was already deeply rooted in another world before the body was created, which is something very, very important. Because how do you feel? How does a person meet? And I'll tell you one story specifically. The great Shaykh Ahmed al-Alawi, who was a Mustaghnami, he was a Shaykh from Algeria. He died in the 1930s, and he was a Shadh al-Darqawi. But as a boy, he was a cobbler. He would fix people's shoes. His father was very strict on him. He made him memorize the Quran, but he was a little, traditional father. He was a very pious boy. And his mother, if I recall correctly, had a dream that the Messenger of God came to her in a dream, alayhi salatu, and gave her a rose. And the meaning later is that it was Shaykh Ahmed Alawi. And anyway, there was a sheikh in the local area in Algeria named Sheikh Bouzidi. Now, they heard about him, very famous, but then he disappeared. Like the man just disappeared. So he would work in, he had a business with his friend. And at that time, he began to study theology with a particular sheikh. And he would go to work in the day. And he was part of a group, a spiritual movement known as the Isawiya. And one of the things that they did was they would charm snakes. Which isn't good, but we'll see the kind of conclusion to the story. Anyway, he said one day we were working in the shop and this Imam comes in. This Imam Bouzidi just happens to turn up. So I looked at him, and my friend happened to know him first, and he said, I don't know where from. So he said to me, so what's your name? He said, my name's Ahmed. He said, what do you do? He said, introduced himself. He said, I heard you're a snake charmer. Huh? He said, yeah. Oh, pretty good at it, yeah. He said, go and find me a snake, and I want to see, your tricks, what you're good at, how skillful you actually are. So anyway, he said, I looked for half of the day, and till late afternoon, I finally found a little rattlesnake or something like that. He said, I put it in a basket and brought it to the sheikh, and I said, Sheikh, okay. So he brings it out. He managed to charm the snake, and the sheikh said, he managed to charm the snake, and the sheikh says to him, go get rid of it, man. Go get rid of it. Gets rid of it, and he comes back and he says, how good are you at charming snakes? So Sheikh, you've seen me in practice, I managed to do it. He said, there's a really big snake. It's enormous. It's so big that if you are able to control it, that you'll become the Gnostic or the sage of this era. He said, what snake is that? He said, it's very venomous, incredibly venomous. He said, what is it? He said, it's between your shoulders. It's your nafs. If you master it, then you will become the sage of this era. At that point, he swore allegiance to the sheikh, and he had found out that his friend had already done it, but was kept in secret. Sheikh Bouzidi later said to him that he was not permitted to take any disciples by the Messenger of God himself, alayhi salatu wasalam, until he had given allegiance to him, meaning this young man. He became a great a great man of God, a great sage. He's very recent. I mean, some pictures of him on the internet, as well. Now there are stories about him, for instance, where he talks about this kind of connection to this world, and one of the conditions that they mention is that the spiritual master does not take the student unless he can recognize him from that particular time period that precedes this existential life that we have in this world, that precedes a very deep spiritual meaning. He never had any children, the Shaykh. He passed away at the age of around 70 something, if I'm correct. I think so. Now, one thing really amazing about him, he said that I was studying theology and the Shaykh said to me that don't stop studying theology, and he said it really hurt me because I enjoyed my lessons. We studied, the sifat of Allah, and he said I was about to leave the Shaykh. And he said, forget it, I can't do this anymore. You're taking me away from my lessons. And what happened to him was, he said, I left, I bit my tongue, I left the lesson. He said, then a day came where the Shaykh said, go back to your lesson. And he went back and he said that whenever the Shaykh mentioned a point, he said, immediately I could understand it. He said, it got to a point where I began to have panic attacks, anxiety. And he said that I didn't know what to do. And I went to the Shaykh and the Shaykh said, take a pen and a paper and you'll see what happens. So as soon as I had a panic attack, he said, I began to write. And he eventually he ended up completing a tafsir of the Quran. That all of it was from essential inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what was contained inside of him. And it's in print as well, his the Shaykh's tafsir. But this kind of shows you that connection between people and a kind of that just almost replays in this world of great sages and great Gnostics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His story when he died, actually, a French doctor, non-Muslim, was treating him, and he was very ill, and the French doctor gave him an injection, revived him. 2 years later, the Shaykh called him around Dhuhr time. No, before that, maybe 11 or 12 o'clock. And he said to the doctor, come back at Dhuhr time, I'm going to die. This is a non-Muslim reporting this story. So he said to him, oh, you're going to die. You look perfectly fine to me. He said, you just come back and I'm going to die at that time. Just come back at this particular time. So he said, and he was dying. And he looked at my face. He said, dare you put any injection in me today? He said, it's time to go. And then he died. And he was a great man of God. But it kind of it infers a lot of stories that we read about him. It's all about this constant connection to and unlocking that secret within the soul about our meeting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The end of that verse, it stated, Alastu bi rabbikum qawlu bala. The last part is probably the most important, which is shahidna. Shahidna means we have witnessed it. Which is incredible. Sheikh Abdul Aziz Dabagh actually states that there were some people on that day that when God said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? They said no. And he said, wa ulaika al-kuffar. So they are the disbelievers in the world, that they even denied God after he created them. You see, they wanted proof from God even when, and he divides them into four categories of people. And he says that the mu'minun were the ones who said, Bala, shahidna, we have witnessed. Now, so Ibn Hajar says they spent many hundreds of years maybe discussing the future until God gave them bodies and they came to this earth and God caused them to forget. And this is what insan is called. Insan, one of the root meanings of insan is nasiya, to forget. That what human beings actually forgot was that particular day. There's a story, it doesn't really have a sanad as far as I'm aware, where the Prophet ﷺ says to Sayyidina Abu Bakr, do you remember that day? I don't think it has a sanad. And he says, I do, and I remember that you were the first one to say Bala. But that aside, it's definite that the people of God, the great sages, prophets without, I don't need to comment on that, remember that day. And one of the meanings to the verse, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, I didn't create jinn and mankind except to worship me. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, to know me, meaning to know the day that the covenant took place. To remember the day that particular covenant took place. This also explains a lot of deja vu business that occurs according to some where you feel like you know about this, or maybe you had a discussion about something, it comes up in the dunya, it unlocks some part of your mind, and there you go. Now, what about the following? And one of the ulama mentioned this: when you meet somebody and you don't really like them, and then about a year later, you seem to like them a little bit. Normal marriages are like that. Then you, it gets better and better and better. Or marriages sometimes work the other way, where they really get along, and then before you know it, it's a house on fire. What about that? And the ulama, they say about that situation, it's the case that God at any point can change people's hearts, even if at that particular level they don't like each other. God can place hub in their hearts. One of the Ibn Qudama, I think, states the following: that actually the soul was created in two. It was one and it was split apart. And you can meet the other half of your soul in the dunya. Now, some infer that means it's a female. There's a male and female division. And you see sometimes on these wedding cards, you see souls are made in heaven or something like that. And under it says Al-Quran. It's not in the Quran. It's not even in the Hadith. It's just some of the interpretations of that. And the funny thing is, people often quote this and they say, look, there you go. And then they end up getting divorced. And it doesn't really make sense anymore. But it's one of the meanings of that particular is that the souls are made in twos, or they split a soul and then it's split. Kharputi goes even further than that. He talks about the soul was made and then it was split. One part was related to the qalb, one part related to the nafs, and we're going to go into that later, inshallah. Now, I've already mentioned that point. The second part of the line is mazajta dam'an jara min muqlatin bidami, and this is the conclusion to his remembrance that has left your eyes so red with tears. Now, does it literally mean that he was bleeding? Allah knows best. Or his eyes were bloodshot, or his eyes were incredibly red. Allah knows best. But this is the external manifestation of his internal feelings. You know, sometimes we do something and externally it kind of looks good, but there's no internal. Ibn Arabi was on Hajj, for instance, and he said, I saw a man clinging to the ghilaf of the Kaaba, and he was praying for dunya. You know, people go to the Kaaba, they pray, Allah give me a beautiful wife, a nice car, a big house. People do that. And he said to him, what are you doing? And he said, well, you know, it is what it is. And he said, you're here for the dunya. I said, what are you here for? He said, Ibn Arabi, Shaykh Muhyiddin. And Shaykh Muhyiddin said, no, he said to another one, what are you here for? He said, I've come to see the Kaaba. So he said to Shaykh Muhyiddin, Shaykh al-Akbar, he said, what are you here for? He said, I've come to see God. And he collapsed when he said it. He didn't go to see God, but it just shows that's a manifestation of his internal intention, of the state that kind of he was in. So you often find a kind of public type of manifestation that's not rooted internally. But Busayri states that he was weeping such that his eyes were bloodshot. The ulama don't really comment on this much. Some state it's literal, others say that it's not, it's just a figurative, and I follow that position is figurative, but it shows his over emotional state that he had. Anyway, the next line refers to another place. أمهبت الريح من تلقاء كاظمة وأمض البرق في الظلماء من إضامي. Yeah. So he states, or is it the wind blowing from the direction of Kazima and the lightning flashing in the black night from Mount Idam? So we're back to the signs that are reminding al-Busayri of the Prophet ﷺ. He's in a traumatic state, an anxious state, a state of separation, a state of wanting to leave this world, a state where his dreams are better than his wakeful state, because the soul traverses beyond the body and goes into the world of ru'ya, of visions, where he sees the messenger of God every night. Like Imam Malik said, I did not sleep a night except that I saw the messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam. So he's seeing him every night, and when he wakes up, the pain comes back. Na'am saratifu man ahwa fa'arraqani wal hubbu ya'taridu ladhati bil alami. That Busayri states that pain is a mix of pleasure. Love is a mix of pleasure and pain. so he feels pain again. He weeps. He's can't walk anymore. Some say his disability is actually associated to his love for the Prophet ﷺ, that he had reached such a state of love that his body couldn't function normally anymore. His body couldn't function. That's me for. Is that the world of the souls? If you can turn it off or turn it on, there only can be one of me, unless you have some access to a place called Alam al-Mithal, where there's two of me, well, one here and one there, and we're not going to discuss that today. And we may be completely different, so or completely the same. So now he mentions this another point after Dhu Salam. He goes into a place called a point. At this point, he mentions Habbatir Rih, or is it Habbatir Rih? Now, Habbatir Rih translated here as wind blowing. Now, the word Habba Yahubbu in Arabic has two meanings. It almost always comes with the word Rih, but it doesn't mean to blow. Habba doesn't mean to blow. The root meaning of Habba is to get up and rush to do something serious. That's the root meaning of Habba. This Habba. So to get up and rush towards something with steadfastness, that's what the word means. But here, and almost in all poetry, Habba, this verb comes with the word Rih. Now, it means a gentle wind, but the word Rih has two meanings. It has two plurals and two meanings. Rih, in fact, is a collective noun. It refers to winds and wind, but it has a plural which is Riyah. And to that end, God in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Rih in a negative manner, where he talks about a punishment, a Rih as a punishment to the Qawm of Thamud, for instance. And the Prophet himself said, Allahumma ja'alha riyah wa la taj'alha rihan. Allah, make it riyah, not rih. So rih generally in the Arabic language is used to mean a very bad wind. However, the majority of philologists consider the words to be very interchangeable. That you can use one for bad, both of them for bad wind, like a harmful wind which destroys nations, and also for a very good wind that is full of scent. Now, yeah, habba yahubbu, I should have said. Now, in this particular context, it's winds that carry the fragrance of the beloved. Now, this connects directly to Dhu Salam, the tree that the Prophet ﷺ sits beneath, that kind of absorbs his prophetic perfume. And then this wind comes, carries that perfume to the people or to the lovers, very specifically to the lovers. Why do I mention that? See scents in our religion, particular scent. It's only, we can't smell, for instance, as animals can smell. You see? We cannot see certain colors. We can only see through a particular spectrum. The awliya, the people of God, for instance, can see things, or they're allowed, or God opens for them particular doors where they can see things that other people can't see. The proof of that is simply in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that the prophets are given this ability. And the ulama agree that whatever ability in terms of a miracle the prophets are given, the people of God, non-prophets, can be given that except for three: the Mi'raj, the journey, the Quran, and the splitting of the moon. So they're allowed to see certain things that we cannot, for instance, or maybe some of you can, but cannot see. Similarly, they smell certain scents that we cannot smell. That are not discernible to all of us. Now, proof of that is when somebody is passing away and they're of piety, they will smell certain scents. They will smell it from another dimension. So they'll say, oh, we can smell this, or we can smell that. They will see certain things that other people cannot see. Shaykh Abdul Rahman ibn Jawzi, Abu Faraj, has a famous story about him that when he was dying, that his grandson was with him, and he kept saying, what do you want me to do with these peacocks? And they didn't understand what he was saying. So he's looking right and left, and he was stroking something. And then he passed away. And then one of his students saw him in his dream, and he said, I saw Abu Faraj, Shaykh Abdul Rahman in Jannah on a mimbar made out of pearls giving khutbah to angels. Because he was a great khatib, he was a great wa'idh, one who gave what's the translation? Why he was a great, what's the admonisher, that's the word, admonisher of bad and call it to good. Now, the meaning of that story is that the angels placed in front of him peacocks to distract him from them removing his soul. Many other stories, like they say about Imam al-Bukhari, that certain people smelled perfume when they were placing him in his grave. You have many, many stories like this. Literally, people can smell death, especially the good type, where they get a scent or they get something of that kind that's unusual. You see them look around and then God takes their, or the angel takes their soul. So this type of scent for the khawas is very, very important, that the lovers of the Prophet ﷺ smell a particular scent. There are many stories where the people of God mentioned that they smelt something and immediately after they saw the Prophet ﷺ in a wakeful state. Immediately after they saw him in a wakeful state. Which is one of the signs that if you are going to get that vision, you'll smell something first, a particular type of perfume, and then you'll see the Messenger of God in a wakeful state. I read an article about 2 weeks ago, no, about a month ago, a very long article about the hadith, man ra'ani fil manami sayara yaqdatan, that he who sees me in his dream will see me when he's awake. That it doesn't mean you'll see the Prophet ﷺ when you're in a wakeful state, and this refers to very, very long. Somebody wasted a lot of time on that. And I kind of concluded that maybe they don't want to see the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, even if it was disputed, let's say, you would always go for the positive side of it. You may get the vision of the Prophet ﷺ rather than the former. Very odd to me. Imam Subki makes very, very clear. He says it doesn't make any sense if you say it's the Day of Judgment, because then even the kuffar get to see the Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment. And they plead and they petition him to intercede on their behalf. So he said, as for the great believers who see the Prophet ﷺ in a dream, the greatest gift is to see him in a wakeful state. Now, we've kind of covered that. Also in the Quran, we have a few verses. فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمُ الرِّيحِ that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Ad and Thamud, where barren winds He sends them. Now, we move on to the word Kadhima. We don't have that long left. The word Kadhima in Arabic, Kadhim in Arabic refers to suppressing something. Kadhim, Allah mentions the word in the Quran, Kadhimin in the Quran. Kadhimin. In Surah Mu'minun. What verse is it? 18, I think. I can't remember. Kadhimun, which Allah refers to those people who are choked. So this word, the root meaning of this word is to suppress. But what's the reference here? Because in the translation, and the lightning flashing in the black night and the Mount of Idam. But before that, the wind coming from Kadhima. Now Kadhima, where is it? Some say Kadhima is in fact Medina al-Munawwara. You're going to say, how can it be Medina al-Munawwara? The word means in the Quran to be choked, to suppress something. They say because the word Kadhim or Kadhama means to restrain your anger. One of the root meanings means to restrain your anger. And they say one of the special qualities of Medina al-Munawwara, that anybody who has an anger problem, if he goes to Medina, Allah will cure it. That in Medina al-Munawwara, Allah will take away the anger from the city itself, the blissful air in the city and the earth in the city, even though they've changed a lot of it now, and they've imported a lot of earth from other places to change the land of Medina, but it will restrain your anger. Medina al-Munawwara, and you probably know that yourselves. When people go to Mecca, for instance, and there's a hustle and bustle, but as soon as you enter Medina, there's a very soft type of mellow atmosphere where people just automatically become calm. The worst people, obviously, they are the ones who get angry than in Medina al-Munawwara. Often it's the Mutawwa, the police force. Well, they don't really, maybe it doesn't apply to them. There's always some people are exempt from the rule. Al-am khussa anhu al-ba'd. Some people, no medicine, every medicine you try, it doesn't work. It's like Abu Jahl, every medicine that the Prophet ﷺ administered, he's just kind of, he didn't want it. Even though he would secretly go in the nighttime outside the window of the Prophet ﷺ and listen to the Quran and be fascinated by it. He was caught one time And they said, what are you doing? He said, and I walked away. But he was fascinated by, one of the leaders of the Quraysh, the Prophet ﷺ. He went to see him, and he was known for his expertise in recognizing the poets, the sorcerers, the magicians. And when he went in, the Messenger of Allah spoke, and when he was speaking, he put his hand over the Messenger of Allah's face, and he said, "You must stop." And he came out. He said, "I have seen sorcerers." He said, "He's not a sorcerer." "I have seen poets." "He's definitely not a poet." "I've seen magicians." "He's not a magician." He said, "By God, whatever he is, whatever he brings, it's not from here." And I had to literally cover his mouth to tell him to stop. He's influencing that much. So Abu Jahl must have had a great wall built, almost like the wall that keeps Ya'juj Ma'juj at bay, that he just wouldn't. But this is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From the two, he converted one, or allowed the conversion of one, which is Umar ibn al-Khattab, that the Prophet's dua still came true. Now, so it's a place where the heart, or rather the anger disappears. The anger disappears. Yeah. Now, some state that it's actually another place. It's actually the name of a mountain. A mountain. But others say that it's the name of the Rawda of the Prophet ﷺ, Kalzima, that actually to restrain your anger, you must go in front of the Prophet ﷺ and petition his help and his assistance. And just the mere presence actually will remove the anger from one's body. From one's body. Then he continues and he talks about idam. He says, وَأَوْمَضَ الْبَرْقُ فِي الظَّلْمَاءِ مِنْ إِضَمٍ, and the lightning flashing in the black night. Now, barq is lightning. أَوْمَضَ يُومِضُ means to flash. Now, this is amazing. Kharputi states that this is the face of the Prophet ﷺ. The face of the Prophet ﷺ. His light, the light of the Prophet ﷺ. He said the barq, the light, is actually that's flashing in the sky that Busayri can see, is a light of the Messenger of God that he can see, and he gives proof from it from hadith. He states that the Hujjaj, when they would go make Hajj, they said when they would come back in the night time and get to the outskirts of Medina, he said they could see a light coming from Medina al-Munawwara. They could see a light, and it was a messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam. Further proof is a hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, narrated by Imam Tirmidhi in his Sunan, who states that when the messenger came into Medina, on the day he came, he said we couldn't see the dark blackness anymore in the night. So the night with the sky was full of light. It literally physically disappeared. We couldn't see in the sky anymore. And his daughter said, the Fatima to Zahra alayhi salam, it's a very similar narration related by her, that literally a light that they could see. And you saw many of these things. For instance, there was an illness in Medina that the Ansar mentioned to the Prophet Ya Rasulullah, when the Treaty of Aqaba, for instance, when they came and they took the bay'ah to Radwan, or they took the bay'ah, sorry, and there were around 72 people there then in Medina that had converted, and they said to the Prophet that, come to Medina, we'll give you men, we'll give you protection, we'll give you everything, and but where we fear that once that that's all occurred, you'll want to go back home, you'll want to go back to, so we will give you all this on one condition, that you never leave Medina al-Munawwara. And the Prophet ﷺ promised them that he would never leave Medina al-Munawwara and he will stay with them. And one day that after a particular war, the booty was being handed out, and some of the young men were arguing amongst each other, saying that why do the Muhajirun, the people of Makkah, get more than us Ansar? We took the Masjid Allah in alayhi salatu wasalam. And they went and told the Prophet ﷺ, when he came into the gathering, the older Ansar said, Ya Rasulullah, it is the kids that said it, it wasn't us. And then he called for all of them to come, and he said, isn't it enough that you've received the messenger of God, that you want material goods like the dunya? And they say all of the Ansar at that point wept in realizing what they had received in contrast to what they thought that they need in the dunya. So this light remained there, and they all could see, all of them could see. And at times even there are stories that light still occurs. Like in one story that I read, I don't know what century it was, that they saw the light coming from the grave of the Prophet ﷺ into the sky on a particular day, that they saw that particular light again, and they would often see. And Abu Hurairah saw it in several hadith. In the night time he could see. What's very, very important about this particular narration is the fact that first he mentions darkness, light, and then he mentions darkness. So look, he says barqu fi dhalma, but earlier there's no mention of darkness. Dhu salam is about the light. When you're in the light, the Prophet ﷺ will take shade, the sun is out. And Khurputi states that this infers that Busiri is in such a state that when he's awake in the daytime or in the nighttime, he's constantly overcome by the remembrance of the Prophet ﷺ, that the true lover is the one that's influenced in the day and in the night. Why? Because we all like kind of remember in the nighttime. That's when piety kind of kicks in the nighttime, because we start to see the dark, maybe remember the grave or something. But in the daytime, people are busy at work, forget about the beloved. These days, obviously, it's the beloved is kind of ambiguous. Normally, it's on a text or a WhatsApp group or on Facebook that you're remembering the beloved. So there's the Prophet ﷺ says, "Zurghib tazdada hubban," visit him frequently, love will increase. WhatsApp has destroyed that. But in those days, they were left to their memories. But the people in the day that remembered the Prophet ﷺ and the night were the real people of love. Fi dhalma'i, in the nighttime, mean idam. Now, idam is a mountain, but it's also a few other places which I also mentioned. So he states it's a mountain close to Medina al-Munawwara, and it's the place that the Prophet ﷺ would spend the most of his time. إذ في أكثر أوقاته كان يسكن فيه. He used to literally live in this area. He would go away and he would retreat to this area all of the time. Now, Khurputi states that either they literally mean that place that the Prophet ﷺ would be, that he would spend all of this time, or it's a place that it's a metaphor for any place that reminds you of the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam is also idam, any place. And then he mentions the story or the meaning of the light coming in the night time. Now also later he's going to mention something else, but I'll mention it right away. That one of the meanings to this وَأَوْمَضَ الْبَرْقُ فِي الظَّلْمَاءِ is that idam is a mountain. Idam is a mountain. Now, when the Arabs would eat, what they would do is they would make a fire outside of their tent, so that any traveler in the distance could see that fire and know that they're eating, so he could join them and eat with them. Okay. Similarly, the stars in the sky, so they'll be guided essentially to that tent. Similarly, in the sky, when people were lost, they use the stars. وَبِنُجُومِهِمْ يَهْتَدُونَ, and with the stars are they guided. Furthermore, if they're in the mountain, when people lived in the mountains, they would also make fires so people could see where they're going. And one of the examples he gives is that the Prophet ﷺ is like a light in the mountain, right at the top of the mountain, shining, that from a distance, because that's what idam is mentioned, because he's very high up, shahiq, very, very high up, that light spreads everywhere. It's different to a light on the ground. It's like a lighthouse. The Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, his light is like a lighthouse that people from distance can see and be guided by. We finished there, and I'll just conclude some of the grammar on before I get to that, just conclude the verses. So these first two verses of Al-Burda, or Al-Kawakib al-Durriya fi Madhi Khayr al-Barriya, or Al-Bur'a, the cure, reflect kind of very important places that Busiri has in his mind. Why do I mention that? In one of the meanings to this, the smell, the scent, Khurputi talks about athar, which are essentially can mean the relics of the Prophet ﷺ. That even till this day you could smell the Messenger of God in his relics, and that every time a person sees those relics, he's reminded of the beauty of the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam. But the first two lines show the deep-rooted pain that Busiri is feeling in separation from the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam, and fulfill the hadith. If anybody fulfilled the hadith, it's him. that, oh, my companions, when the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with them, he talked about a people that were the successful ones, that he called his brothers. We are not the brothers of the Prophet ﷺ whatsoever, but it was just out of suhbah he met out, because the Prophet ﷺ is like a father to us, and it's mentioned in one reading of the Quran also, of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. That doesn't sound good. And they said, who are they, Ya Rasulullah? Is it not us? He said, no, it's the people that have that will live at a particular time, and they will love me, but they have never seen me. And Busayri almost accomplished that state of closeness to the Prophet ﷺ. Now, just very, very quickly, I'm just going to comment, and then I'll take questions on the grammar of the those who just ignore it if you're thinking, what is he talking about. This is a brief overview. I'm not going to give you the full Arab for everything. So just as a brief overview, the first hamza for istifham, min is harf jar, tadhakkur is a masdar or bab tafa'ul used as mudaf here, jiran is mawsuf, the sifa is hidden, al-ka'inin is hidden, the ba is harf jar, the dhi is mudaf, taqdiran, salam is mudaf ilay, majroor due to the ba is adhaf mustaqam muta'alliq to ka'inin, which becomes a sifa of jiran, mawsuf and sifa become mudaf ilay, tadhakkur mudaf and mudaf ilay become ism majroor, jar majroor, or dharf lag muta'alliq, muqaddam to mazaj to fa'al, to the fa'al mazaj to, because due to hasar, to emphasize the meaning, mazajta, fa'al, then mazajta, the sigha is clear there, the fa'il is the damir muttasil, marfu muttasil, dam'an is mawsuf, jara, fa'al, its fa'il is bil mustatir, taqdiru huwa, min harf jar, muqlatin is majroor lafdhan, ba is harf jar, damin, or dami is majroor, this muta'alliq to jara. Both of them are in fact, that fa'il, jumla fa'iliyah becomes sifa of dam'an, mawsuf and sifa become the maf'ul bihi, which all becomes jumla fa'iliyah. The second line, I'll just briefly go over that. Habbat is fa'il mu'annath, the ta at the end is ta ta'ni sakina, but with the kasra for darura. Arih is a fa'il min harf jar tilqa'i, is mudaf, kadhimati mudaf ilay become majroor upon min harf jar, jar majroor muta'alliq, dharf lag muta'alliq to habbat, that will become jumla fa'iliyah. The second awmada bab if'al, al-barku is marfu of fa'il of awmada, fi harf jar of al-ma is majroor lafdhan. This is the first muta'alliq of awmada, min idami is the second muta'alliq, fa'al fa'al muta'alliq, muta'alliqain jumla fa'iliyah. That's a brief grammatical overview of the two verses. Inshallah, I'll take questions now for the last 5 minutes. Bismillah. If you don't have any, then well, next once a month. So it's a bit odd because it's not on the month actually. If you count 3 weeks, okay, so what date will it be on Imdad? If you can just somebody check that. So count 3 weeks from now and it'll be the 4th week. It's confusing. Normally they say become every month, but this, what's the date? Oh, sorry, you got a question. Let me just get the date. 29th of December will be the next lesson. Okay, so just count 3 weeks. That clashes with something. When does winter spring finish?
It starts that week.
That week.
Yeah, 22nd to 2nd of Jan.
2nd of Jan is what day?
Friday. So it starts from the Monday, 22nd to 2nd of Jan.
So the 5th then will do. Okay, then count 4 weeks then. So the next lesson will be the 5th of January. 5th of January, that'll be a little better actually, inshallah. The 5th of January. And we'll try to cover a line or two. This is going to take a very, very long time. 160 lines in the border. I'm not fussed actually, if it takes whatever it takes. So I'm not in any rush. So if you want to get it over and done with, then it's not going to happen here. We may, Armageddon may come on the 10th line. Who knows it? Allah knows best, and how time will change over day to day. But try to attend, inshallah, so we can all collectively benefit. And inshallah, yeah. Do you have questions for?
Regards to the other book, reading
For yourself, meaning at home. Or?
generally when you're reading it for yourself, it's like which verse should you already take?
Oh, yeah, last week we didn't mention. Yeah, okay, understand. I mean, look, the Burda, it's a tried and tested kind of a litany. And the ulama, they mention, Khartuti mentions that the optimal way to recite the Burda. You can recite it when you're driving or singing, or if you're a singer and you've memorized it. But if you want to do it as a meaning in a state of muraqabah almost, then it's best to do everything facing the qibla, the qibla. And he mentioned specifically as a condition actually to face the qibla and read the burda. Now some people took odd people we have in the community offense to that, saying, oh, don't you know, it's not the Quran. Well, the stupidity, everything that we do which is of goodness, we face qibla to do it. This is some people. But no, definitely to praise the Messenger of Allah. That's the jihah. Qibla is just the direction, but it's a direction of, it's the epicenter of spirituality, you see. Spiritual energy is towards the qibla. And in fact, in Imam Zarnuji mentions that two students went to study. When they came back, they studied the same. One of them was successful and the other wasn't. And they realized later that when they studied with the teacher, with the shaykh, one of them would always have his back towards the qibla. So, this is not qibla, but we're qibla that way. So, don't worry, it's not an angle, you're all okay. But in just generally of adab, sometimes there's extreme measures, but people take to like avoid, like somebody's sandal is the other way around. It's always facing upwards. God is in the direction, so you don't have to worry about it. So we're okay with that. So yeah.
I heard something like this, as if you're seeing the Prophet. Somebody said that
to read the burda. Yeah. That's to read any salawat. Ghazali mentions that explicitly, which he states, Ghazali Hujjatul Islam says that whenever you mention the Prophet ﷺ, you mention his name as though you see him. That's with any mention of the Prophet ﷺ's name. People don't shake anymore. You know, the ulama, people, there are reports of people dying when they heard the name of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, they don't have that same, it's not the same effect anymore for certain people. So definitely that should be, because people use it on the internet now, like, I even disgustingly, I couldn't believe it, like Muhammad PBUH. I mean, even to mention the name of the Prophet, Busayri in his entire burda mentions the word Muhammad twice. Once for the Prophet, once for himself. In 160 lines, the word is mentioned twice. Once for himself, being named Muhammad, and once for the Prophet. Because when you talk about the beloved, inference is the best way. The Sahaba never called him by his name. Ever. In fact, Imam Bajuri, Ibrahim Bajuri, has come to Shama'il Tirmidhi, states they never called him a Rajul. And in the hadith of Anas ibn Malik, kana rajulan marbu'a, he was a man that was medium heighted. He said the word doesn't mean rajul, it means rajula to sha'r, that his hair was slightly curly at the back. He said none of the Sahaba even called him that. And God never called him by his name in the Quran, ever, not once in the Quran does God call the messenger of God by his name. He gives him lofty titles, Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, Ya al-muzammil, Ya Taha, or Yasin, all of these great lofty names, but not his name, which shows you that whenever one mentions the name of the Prophet ﷺ, he should be in a state of at least contemplation. But now it's been almost restricted. Look at Asian people, whatever the child's name was, they put Muhammad at the beginning. Now, although that's not traditional, but they had the intention maybe of this hadith, which is weak, but still, that whoever is named Muhammad on the Day of Judgment will get my intercession or be free from the hellfire. They just did it for that reason, which is an incredible intention. And Busayri's name is Muhammad as well, you see. So always has to be in a state of one of the not just one, I've several of the shuyukh, very old people of God, whenever they heard the name of the Prophet, they stand up. They just stand up. I mean, which shows you the you know, قوموا لسيدكم or لذكر اسم سيدكم, which is a great. Nowadays it's kind of, because we don't even call each other with affection, or you know, there are people on Mimbar saying all sorts of things about not respecting great people and using their names in vain and misinterpreting. The Sahaba were very, very careful. You know, they would weep at night lest they, thinking that they may have caused some offense to the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam. Every revelation that came, they asked, according to some narrations, less than 80, some less than 50 questions in the entire lifetime of the Sahaba, fearing that God would reveal against them. Incredible level of respect and overwhelming adab and etiquette in front of the best of creation, which has to be kind of, it's lost in this day and age because nobody has respect anymore. The Prophet ﷺ said, when a community is born out of wedlock, the society is destroyed. And we're just kind of picking up on these habits. And Allah musta'an, basically, it's the greatest fear now is not, if you look now in society, what's disappearing is the traditional love for Ahlul Sunnah for the Prophet ﷺ. is barely there anymore. You'll find 100 gatherings, and 100 of them, 99 of them, you'll find that people don't know how to talk about the Prophet ﷺ. Would just not how to present, how to talk about him. They talk about him like without understanding the kind of care that you need to take when mentioning his name. It's become arbitrary almost. People don't. It's so what, you know, and that's the greatest one, the greatest signs of the day of judgment. That there's no respect left, adab, amongst people when they talk about the Messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam. You won't find it in many places, really. I swear to you, you go to place, especially religious gatherings, are the worst. You see, like hadith, people now, and this is just a lesson for all of us. I don't understand why. Don't send hadith over text messages. You know, people traveled for months to collect one hadith verbally, and then write it down. We send them across text messages like it's along with all the other rubbish that we send. It's such a sacred science that Imam Malik rahimullah ta'ala would not teach hadith until he had made ghusl and dressed in the best of his clothes, and was bitten by a scorpion but still continued narrating the hadith with 100,000 people silent in his gathering. Now when somebody's speaking, they say, I think the messenger said, I think he said. We're talking about, I mean, sending him over email, chain messages. The messenger of God, alayhi salatu wasalam, if you don't know what he said, if you've not been taught it, if you don't understand it properly, then save yourself from Jahannam. The Prophet ﷺ said a man can say one thing and send himself 70 levels into the hellfire just by one word. So people have to be very, very careful of saying that, or presenting something that the Messenger of God said. You may have got it wrong, context wrong, adab as well. What environment are you in? People are smoking, and they're saying the Messenger of God said. This is not the or over food with their mouth full, quoting the words of the Messenger of God alayhi salatu wasalam, or people are shouting. It's a bad environment. It's not the place to talk about the Messenger of God. The place needs to be pure. The intentions need to be pure. Otherwise, no. Sheikh Abdul Aziz Dabbagh, and remember, this is a man, some say didn't reach the age of 30, who he couldn't read or write, but yeah, his student Al-Lamati wrote the whole of Ibriz. There were the words of his Shaykh, and he would go to him, and his student was a scholar. The Shaykh wasn't considered a alim because his knowledge was laduni from God directly, not like wahi but ilham. So he said, I went to him, and this is a great Shaykh now. This is his spiritual master, but he's unlettered. So he sat. They said I quoted the hadith, and he looked at my face, and he said, that's not hadith. And he said, like, I'm the scholar. I mean, he said, I went back, I checked, and the hadith was fabricated. He said, I came back, said, Shaykh, how do you know? He said, because when you speak and you mention hadith, and it's true, light comes from your mouth, I can see. And when it does not, it's not the words of the Prophet ﷺ. As a man who flew in front of Bab Bujlud, I mean, this is because of the adab for the Prophet ﷺ, the great love and connection to the words of the Messenger of Allah. Now we have to observe great adab for the Prophet ﷺ. Sahaba would lift their heads up in front of him. There were Sahaba who never really saw the face of the Prophet ﷺ. You'll be shocked at this. In the books of Sirah, some of the Sahaba could not describe him. They couldn't do it because they never saw his face. They would look up and they would look back down. They literally couldn't describe his face because they just couldn't look at it. They would feel it. They were so overpowered by his light and his jah, almost, that they wouldn't look at his face. For a Sahabi to say to God to take away his eyesight, and God took it away after the demise of the Prophet ﷺ, it shows you the kind of so the respect that they had is, I mean, this is untold amount of respect you find in all of the books. And I think we need to revive this is not an age of change, it's an age of control. Can't change anything anymore. It's the tide is, this Mawj al-Bahr, the waves have already struck the shore. It's very difficult. Age of control. And all I say to people, we may not be able to change people, but at least within our own families, our children, the people close to us, at least if we can have adab for the Prophet ﷺ, we'll be together on the day of judgment under Liwa al-Hamd, the flag of the Prophet ﷺ, inshallah, because it's an age of control now. We bemoan, but it's just going that way. We can't avoid it. But if we have it, and our forefathers had it from the subcontinent, these people had adab for the Prophet ﷺ. They were the worst people in the world. But when it came to the Prophet ﷺ, the people say, oh, but they weren't very practicing, they weren't very this, they weren't very that. And this is a generation who are falling into atheism are saying this. Our generation have fallen into atheism, and we are judging people who, okay, they may not pray much, but look at the love of the Prophet ﷺ is the thing that saved them. It saved them from when you mention, like somebody would be in an argument with them and they would disagree and they would say, but the Prophet ﷺ said, immediately there will be sakati ani. Everybody will be silent. There's no word after that. Nobody would ever argue about that. So, all right, okay. You see, and I mean, this is incredible adab, and I think adab is like Shaykh Naqib al-Attas said, he said, if the world has lost one thing, it's adab, it's etiquette and manners. If they've lost that, if they've lost anything. And that's why people don't see the Prophet ﷺ anymore in their dreams. One of the ulama said, he said, if you want to see the messenger of God in your dream, he said, stop doing makruh things. He said, makruhat. He said, stay away from makruhat. Because he said, the Prophet ﷺ said that there is al-halalu bayin wal-haram bayin. Haram and halal is clear. Between them is a grey area. And beware of it. It's like a shepherd taking his sheep to the fence, not knowing if it's his land or somebody else's land and letting them eat there. And he said, stay away from the makruhat, and then the Prophet ﷺ will visit you, because he loves people who endeavor to be pure. So, I mean, we hope, inshallah. I'll see everybody.
Question for one line. Sometimes one fears that if they see the Messenger of Allah sallallahu, they would fall into a manner which would disrespect him. Is this from shaitan? And if so, how could they get rid of it?
I mean, there cannot be any feeling that precedes the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, because you can feel however you want. When you see the Messenger of God, you don't dictate the meeting. He dictates the meeting. It's your adab is automatic. It's like people that say, how do I know I'll see the Messenger of God? The ulama are very clear. They say, you'll know you see the Messenger of God. I mean, it's not about adab. You have no choice in that gathering. The Prophet ﷺ's overwhelming spiritual power will kind of govern all your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. You see, that's not your choice in it. You don't have any choice in that. I mean, it's good enough just to want to see the Prophet ﷺ. There's no worry in that. How can there be worry if it's like I'll give you just it's not really it's not an analogy, but if you, for instance, are in a distant country and you're feeling very lonely, I mean, often it doesn't matter if they're boys or girls. The first person they remember is their mother. Remember their mother, because of especially mother who's nursed a child all of his life. They remember their mother. I remember I went to Syria first. I was 14 years ago. I saw people crying there, grown men, because they missed their mothers. Crying, literally. I mean, because but my point is here that would anybody ever fear if their mother passed away, seeing their mother in their dream, that they wouldn't have adab when they met her? No, because the overwhelming comfort that they know they'll feel when they meet her. You never feel that way. It's the same with the Messenger of Allah, but magnified. So it's not. There's no fear in seeing the Messenger of Allah. It's comfort, more comfort than seeing your own mother or a family member, because the Prophet ﷺ is closer to people than their family members. So that's my point. So there's nothing in that. No, there's no fear in that. Should we stop there, inshallah? I'll see everybody on the 5th
December.
Monday, 5th of December. Make dua for me, and that this continues, and we all have health to arrive next time, inshallah.